marathon, no, it's a marathon, no, it's a marathon to win, no, it's a marathon, fuck the cemetery that it, no, it's a marathon, no, it's a marathon, no, it's a marathon to win, no, it's a
Okay, so this is gonna be the start of the video. So I'm gonna talk about the trouble with modern relationships. And the first point is old school courting versus new school principles. Right? So in old school courting, a man would have to pursue a woman. Her family would have to approve of his standing. And then a woman would have money saved up from her parents to provide for her partner, and as soon as the courtship and marriage part is coming to a close, and they give them the dowry and they get married, da 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 da, all this other stuff. But the whole point and purpose of men going out and working and getting a thing was to provide for a family. And back then it was that your wife was a prize. Back then it was your wife was a prize. You work to be able to support your prize, your family, right? So now it's a little bit different nowadays, and women are more independent, and I love that. But I know that there are a lot of people that subscribe to old school courting that want it to go back to that way, and there's a lot of things where I can see where things are confused for everybody, because like I said, women were the prize, but women were also emotionally available. Women put work into the relationship. Women emotionally sacrificed for their love and their relationship and their families. Nowadays, women are still willing to sacrifice for those things, but at the same time, women can have their independence. You don't have families, well, for the most part, you don't have families saving up dowries to give to your future spouse or whatever. Women are working for themselves. Women are a little bit more independent, and they don't have as much time and energy to put all that emotion into their family and all of that stuff. And I'm not saying that this is true, because there's some women that work, do the 9 to 5, all that, take care of home, and then are still emotionally available and healthy enough to support their families. But a lot of women are seeing that they want to put just as much emotional care into themselves. And unfortunately, that means that men have to be more emotionally mature. But the society tells men they don't have to be emotionally mature, because that's women's job. But women are exhausted, because it's like, not only do you want us to remain emotionally mature, but we're out here working. You want us to help pay the bills and clean up the house and take care of the kids and be emotionally mature enough to carry the entire relationship. But meanwhile, you just show up and pay bills. So that's where a lot of women are coming from with it. And then there are a lot of men that are like, well, women don't seem like they want to be submissive anymore, all this other stuff. And that's because they are doing a lot. And I wrote down something. So the first part of it was the old school courting versus new school principles. And I'm going to start talking about alpha males now, right? So a lot of alpha males, it doesn't seem like they're actually looking for love. It looks like they're looking for a obedient wife or an obedient harem of women. Like, and that's the turnoff for women, where it's like, if you're going to frame yourself as the prize, why can't you at least try to be more emotionally cognizant, more emotionally intelligent, if you're going to frame yourself as the prize? But it's a lot of men who see themselves as alpha male. They don't have they're not in touch with their emotions or intimacy. And that's something that everybody needs. But since they're the prize, it trivializes and cheapens the dating market, honestly. And there's nothing wrong with wanting to feel like you're the prize as a man. There's nothing wrong with that. But when you're systematically breaking down women in order to make yourself a prize, that comes off as not alpha male, but a weaker, a beta male that wants to be an alpha male. An alpha male, a real alpha male, is not out here calling himself an alpha male every 2 seconds. Is not out here talking about how he is the prize and what do you bring to the... Well, there's nothing wrong with asking what you bring to the table, because women want to know the same thing. Everybody wants to know, if you're going to be dating somebody, what are you bringing to the table? What is the benefit? So I understand, but at the same time, it's like, unfortunately, a lot of men that claim they are alpha males try to use that to cover up their very toxic and blatant misogyny that they have against women, and use their so-called alpha male status in order to demean and humiliate women who are already dealing with enough as it is. And because of this, now there's the new modern type of girl, the hot girl, the fun girl, and they see the benefits that these so-called alpha males and some regular males are getting from being like this, being like, I'm the prize, and being like, what do you get for me? And now there is a whole generation of women that are like, you know what? You want to play that game? We can play that game too. I don't have to be emotionally invested in you. I can just go around, have fun, and see what you can give me. And I don't want to be emotionally invested in you because I know that you're going to disrespect and demean me. And that's why there's a whole generation of women that's out here like, fuck these niggas, get money. I don't give a fuck about your feelings. What can you do for me? And that's where we are right now. And the people in between are just kind of like, damn, I'm not calling myself an alpha male. I'm not trying to frame myself as the prize. And then there are women that are like, damn, like, I like to go out and have fun, but I'm not about to go and try to use people and get what I can out of them. And unfortunately, I understand why a lot of women are like this, because like I said, women who don't try to get benefits out of the relationship are bound to get used and trampled over, because in this new age of dating, everybody's looking for benefits. Like, well, what can you do for me? And they're not really emotionally invested. There's not as much intimacy. And that goes back into the Trevor Noah video that I watched earlier. And that's why I recorded it. And I'm going to add it to this. Right? So, yeah. And with that being said, what does that mean for everyone else? What does that mean for everyone else who's not subscribing to being an alpha male or a hot girl or a fun girl, trying to get benefits instead of seeing intimacy and, actual bonds instead of using people? So I came up with 2 different things. There's 2 different gaps that exist now, because I feel like in this modern world, we normalize toxic relationship traits these days. And because we normalize these toxic relationship traits, we have the user gap and the trauma gap. The user gap is the heartbreak of well-intended men and women. And the trauma gap is the traumatization and demise of well-intended men and women. So, if you're not going out here using people, there's also a whole generation of people who have good intentions in dating, who are not out here trying to fuck people over, but unfortunately, they've ran into way too many cluster B personality toxic relationships. And I'm not saying all of them are cluster B personality relationships, I'm just saying toxic relationships in general. Ran into too much of them where they didn't get the intimacy, they didn't get the connection they were craving. Instead, they got used by people who are going around dating a bunch of people, wondering what they can get out of them, men and women included. So then there's this group of regular ass people that's like, well, I ran into this shit too many times. Fuck this dating shit. I have a complex because I have my guard up and I'm afraid that people are not going to try to be intimate. People are not going to try to build a real connection. They're just going to try to come and use me for the things that I have, or use me for the status, the connections, etc. People use people for all types of shit nowadays in this modern world. User culture is real. User culture is real in this modern society, and people who are not users are suffering because of it. So that's one explanation that I feel about the user gap. And then I'm thinking about the trauma gap, which is the traumatization and demise of well-intended men and women. Unfortunately, I've seen too many stories of people in domestic partnerships where things get out of control and all of a sudden their lover their argument escalates and their lover unfortunately kills them, or in a relationship and their lover brutalizes them and they get away, but now they have a complex and they're traumatized. And unfortunately, if you're already traumatized from that level of toxicity in a relationship where you were brutalized or almost died, running into people who are in this user culture is not going to help. Also, running into cluster B personalities, not going to help. And that's another thing. Like, people, this society is becoming more and more narcissistic as we go along. So there are more and more people that are accepting of toxic behavior, toxic trait, and cluster B personality traits. So, like I said, unfortunately, well-intended men and women are losing, while users and abusers are fucking winning. And unfortunately, because of this, there are some people that are just opting out of dating altogether, or they're becoming just as toxic as their toxic counterparts. And it's ruining the entire shit for everybody. So, that's my little rant. That's what I see with problems in modern dating, and I'm gonna do more of these because I have a lot to say about these topics when it comes to men and women. So that's my piece for now, and now I am. So yesterday, I was thinking about men and women in relationships, and I wrote a few things down. But before I get to it, I want to record something that Trevor Noah said, and it goes exactly with what I was talking about yesterday. So here we go.
Did you see this thing today? I think it was trending for a moment on Twitter about like the right to sex. Did you see this? Did anyone? Did you see this? It was one of the wildest conversations people were having, and I think part of it came down to bad branding or whatever. But essentially, I think there was a Washington Post article that came out saying that men in their 30s are having less sex than ever before, in history. Just men are not having and I think it was framed as, and forgive me, but I'm paraphrasing, it was like framed as they're not having enough sex or not having as much sex as they would like to have, and the number has gone down dramatically over the past few decades. And so obviously that study came out, and I was reading that, and the first thing I thought was like, well, you don't know how much people are having sex. You know how much people told you they're having sex. That's the first thing. But even if it is true, it was interesting to see the conversations that came afterwards, because then some people were saying, this is why we need to have a right to sex in this country. You need to have a right to sex. No, and I think it got. That's why I say bad branding. I think what some people were saying was, we need to decriminalize sex work in America and in the world because we've created these structures that now make people ashamed. And that conversation, I don't even think I'm, close to being qualified to speak on. I think sex workers have actually started many great conversations around how they think the industry should be formalized and changed. But what I did find was, I found it interesting how the framing always talks about men and sex alone. No, but it never talks about two things. One, very seldom in society do we talk about how the expectation of sex was often set by a society controlled by men, and women were just subject to it, And as that has changed, you would hope that now the dynamics would change. But it also makes it seem so one-dimensional. They go like, women, men aren't having the sex that they want to have or wish to have. And I go like, how much sex do they think they're supposed to have? Let's start there. Secondly, do they think they're entitled to the sex? And third, and most importantly for me, and I really feel like we don't speak about this enough, is people don't realize how often men are experiencing a lack of intimacy. And the only place that they can experience that intimacy is through sex. We've created a society where men are so afraid to be vulnerable with each other, to be, sensitive with each other, to care for each other, to love each other. Even saying that as a guy, you always have to change. It'd be like, you can't just say, I love you. You have to be like, I love you, dog. You know what I mean? You got to throw it, like you can't just say it. And it's interesting because that is where I do feel women have done a much better job of being there intimately for each other. Not sexually, but intimately. And I think we take for granted how much in society men who say sex is the thing they're not getting are actually struggling with a lack of companionship, of intimacy, of being in a space with a person where they're sharing, everything from serotonin to endorphins to what humans need to feel, And I hope we can change that conversation just a little bit more. I hope we get to the place where guys go, oh, I actually didn't need the sex. I needed to be held. And I live in a society where it's hard to be held unless I'm having sex. Because as guys, you can't just go to a guy and be like, just hold me. True. And I hope the conversation goes there, not just from, well, a right to sex. It's like, no, sometimes you just want to be held. There are many sex workers who've talked about this, where they'll talk about how many men will pay them and then say, hey, can we just talk? Can we just sit on the bed and talk? And can you just hold me? Can you just... And I think if we have a little more of those conversations, a few more honest conversations, a few more vulnerable conversations, we may get to a place where it's not just about sex or no sex. It's people actually saying, oh yeah, we are full human beings who require a full spectrum of affection and affections towards us. And in the same way, for many years, great therapists have been saying that women have to be allowed to express that they want and enjoy sex. I think we also have to encourage men in society to go, hey, I want to express and enjoy intimacy despite or apart from sex. And maybe we can make it happen. What do you think? You have been?
Cemetery that it's a marathon. It's a marathon. It's a marathon. Do it. It's a marathon. Fuck the cemetery that it's a marathon. It's a marathon. It's a marathon. Do it. It's a marathon. Fuck the cemetery that it's a marathon. It's a marathon. It's a marathon. Do it. It's a marathon.